Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session on searching for qualitative evidence as part of the Day with the Cochrane Information Retrieval Methods Group presentation. My name is Dr. Andrew Booth, and I'm very pleased to be able to present this information on behalf of the co-conveners of the Cochrane Qualitative and Implementation Methods Group. Now, when we speak about guidance for the qualitative evidence, then we're actually talking about three related sets of documents. We're talking first of all about Chapter 21 of the Cochrane Handbook on Qualitative Evidence, and this covers the whole process of reviewing qualitative evidence, and searching comprises a short section of this. We then went into more detail in specifically paper 2 of the guidance series published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, but there is also relevant information on searching for process evaluations in paper 4 in the series, and on reporting in paper 6 of the series. And then finally, a methodological review published in the journal Systematic Reviews is designed to review the evidence to support searching for qualitative research against the headings of the 7S framework. And this presentation will use that 7S framework to structure the information. So when we look at the Cochrane Handbook, we're specifically looking at Chapter 21 and Section 7 on searching for qualitative evidence, and this is the full list of Cochrane co-conveners. So the context for searching for qualitative research, as outlined in the chapter, is that compared with effectiveness reviews, procedures for retrieval of qualitative research are relatively underdeveloped. And there are particular challenges that we face with qualitative research. They tend to use non-informative titles and abstracts. They use diffuse terminology, particularly around qualitative methods. There is poor indexing in relation to subject headings and subject terms. And there's an overwhelming prevalence on most databases of quantitative studies. It's been estimated that perhaps 1% of Medline is qualitative compared with quantitative studies. And the chapter recommends that when planning a search that you consider the 7S framework, which involves looking at sampling, sources, structured questions, search procedures, strategies and filters, supplementary strategies, and then finally standards for reporting. First of all, in relation to sampling, in contrast with an effectiveness review where the expectation is of comprehensive and sometimes described as exhaustive approaches, the possibility, although comprehensive searching is still available for qualitative systematic reviews, the possibility is there for purposive searching. And this particular approach is more sensitive to the qualitative paradigm. It can use such methods as theoretical sampling, maximum variation sampling, so for example looking at very different cases, and also intensity sampling, looking at very rich, very clear examples of a particular case. In terms of sources, unlike effectiveness reviews where almost all of the sources tends to be either journal articles or perhaps precursors to journal articles like protocols, the sources to consider with qualitative research include book chapters, theses, and grey literature reports. And so a search strategy for qualitative evidence should place particular extra emphasis on such sources. It can be said that a search across databases typically yields between 90 and 94% of the included materials, but the extra materials take the specific extra effort required to identify book chapters, theses, and reports. Local databases can be particularly valuable because we know that qualitative research is very susceptible to differences in context. When it comes to structured questions, in contrast to PICO, the recommended formulations typically include SPICE, SPIDER, or one recently featured for the WHO, Perspective. In terms of search procedures, the cluster method has been suggested as a novel way of finding associated or sibling reports, and this essentially uses 6 different methods for pursuing leads from a key or index article, and also involves searching for accompanying theories. So that's the 7 ingredients of the cluster approach. When you're specifically looking for theory, a separate approach, Behemoth, combines such terms as model or theory or concept or framework to try and find explicit mentions of theory. In terms of strategies and filters, search filters for qualitative studies lack the specificity of the quantitative counterparts. Again, these have largely been developed over a longer period than the qualitative filters, but nevertheless filters may facilitate efficient retrieval, either by study type, for example looking for occurrences of words to do with qualitative or qualitative research, or in relation to mixed methods, or by trying to capture the perspective of interest. So, for example, SIGN has a filter in relation to patient preferences. And these filters are particularly useful when the quantitative literature is overwhelmingly large, and so one would be required to read a large number of quantitative articles in order to find included qualitative studies. In terms of supplementary strategies, the poor indexing of qualitative studies that we mentioned earlier makes citation searching both forward in terms of citation searches through Google Scholar and Web of Science, and backward in terms of following up references. In addition, related articles features, such as are available on PubMed and Google Scholar, can be very useful in order to track down related studies. Experience from using such supplementary strategies found that for one particular review that 5 qualitative studies were uniquely identified by such supplementary strategies. So this is not using the database searching that is more typical, and 3 of these studies were of good quality. 1 of these was of moderate quality, and so the 4 included studies actually made a significant contribution to the synthesis. In terms of reporting standards, because qualitative research is quite diverse and methods for qualitative synthesis can vary quite significantly, some authors have chosen to focus on reporting individual aspects of the synthesis. So, for example, methods have been suggested for defining the searching that has gone on within a study report. Many qualitative synthesis don't actually describe their techniques of searching very well. 40% of a sample, although chronologically quite an old sample now, didn't describe how the studies were identified at all, so started from the synthesis process. We documented whether particular search criteria had been fulfilled, and we found a very uneven picture, and we came up with a mnemonic, Starlight, standards for reporting literature searches that required that the sampling strategy, the type of study, approaches, the range of years, the limits, inclusions and exclusions, the terms used, and the electronic sources was prescribed as a template for reporting search criteria. And this structure, Starlight, continues to be used even though it hasn't been formally developed using the consensual methods that are now recommended for reporting standards. Here is one of the available reporting standards. This is NTREC. It again hasn't been developed using consensus. It was produced by a small group of experienced qualitative researchers, but the 4 elements that are required by NTREC based on the corresponding PRISMA reporting template are the approach to searching, which you will see does pick up this very important point of whether searches are comprehensive or use purposive searching, and whether they're pre-planned or iterative. The inclusion criteria, which very much meet the Starlight criteria outlined earlier. The data sources, which acknowledge the wider variety of grey literature and thesis type reports, and the electronic search strategy, which in accordance with wider Cochrane should be provided, showing not only the terms but also the relationship between them. When it comes for searching for process evaluations, then this is very experimental, but based on experience and practice, 4 potential approaches include identifying studies at the point of study selection, so doing what we call a big bang search for all publication types, and then identifying process evaluations as one of the study types that you code for. A second approach is by harnessing the fact that these are associated with randomized controlled trials and therefore using randomized controlled trial or clinical trial filters. A third approach is to use a number of terms identified in the literature as being associated with process evaluations. These include process evaluation, program, spelt both ways evaluation, feasibility study, implementation, proof of concept. And these sort of filters need to be subject to further testing. And then the final approach would be to rely on citation-based approaches, for example, following up from a trial to a process evaluation, again, going forward through citation searching or backward through reference checking. But detailed guidance on this is provided in the supplementary guidance Article 4 in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. And we conclude just with a number of the references that have appeared since the most recent edition of the handbook has been published. You'll see that some of these help us to understand the role of qualitative research in terms of the grey literature, in terms of its impact on context, in terms of formulating the question, and others of these studies look at supplementary search methods and the availability of filters. So thank you for your attention. I hope that you found this information useful, and please consult the original sources to which I referred in order to check the detail of the methods that I have outlined.